Hello. We've been thinking a little bit more about happiness. What we talked about yesterday. Where do we find our happiness? Maybe we've discovered in reflecting upon it that we really do rely a lot on the first level of happiness, these pleasures, right? Wherever these pleasures might be, that's where I find my happiness. Or maybe in the second level, these personal, in a sense, achievements, where getting ahead and accomplishing this and that, that's where I find my happiness. Maybe we've even found ourselves in this competitive game where we're constantly either a winner or a loser, comparing ourselves to other men, other women, and whatever things that we think are important. Always trying to be better than them so we can feel good about ourselves and have happiness. But these first two levels ultimately lead us or can lead us to the third level, which is a happiness about giving ourselves to others, being for others. Do you find happiness when you serve others? What would even happen in your life if you decided to just think about, how can I better serve my family? How can I better serve my friends? How can I love those around me? You might actually find yourself a lot happier. To give up some of your own personal desires to achieve things, to give up your own pleasures, or just to kind of put them in their place so that you can begin to actually find greater happiness in your life. And as we truly begin to live for others, if we don't kind of allow ourselves to turn in on ourselves in one sense, in trying to find the fourth level of happiness in the third, then we'll be set for this fourth level, which is to find things in the eternal good, the eternal beautiful, to find things in God who is love. This is ultimately the fourth level of happiness. This is what we talked about earlier in the beatific vision, that vision in heaven of seeing God face to face, of being with God. This is where we find the greatest happiness. Perhaps you've never kind of had a taste of that, and so what I'm talking about seems to not make any sense. But there's something that draws us on when we begin to realize we can't find the happiness that we seek in pleasures, in achieving things, even in serving others. And we begin to find that it is actually in the transcendent, in what is above, in God, that we find happiness. So I'm so grateful that you're a part of the parish, that you're desiring to grow in your faith, because ultimately, if you give way, and I'm going to try to lead you there as pastor, to lead you to happiness, and true happiness that doesn't just get kind of swept away, but that remains, just like the peace that Jesus gives remains. So I invite you then to remain in Jesus and to find in Him a greater happiness. As we enter now coming into this Holy Week, I'm confident that that can be the reality that you experience. So many blessings, and if you're going to stay on for the retreat, I invite you to do so now. Otherwise, have a great day. We embark on another day to draw near to the Lord in prayer, a day of retreat. Some of you may have joined late, or you've been with me the whole time. Either way, I think it would be valuable to take a little bit of time and just do some review. The actual nature of learning how to pray, learning how to be in relationship with God is really a process that happens over time, and we find ourselves actually learning the same things and trying to put them into place, and sometimes succeeding, sometimes less so. But it's these principles that lay way to a relationship. They really are tools of a sort. It's not like we need to perfect each of the tools before we can learn how to pray. More, the tools are there to to assist, or even rather to help focus, so we can just put ourselves in a place to be found by God. It's one of my favorite stories that I heard that I like to repeat in the context of retreat, this being found by God. So we'll start with that. There was this blind priest, just a gem of a man, who I experienced as one of my instructors when I went on a retreat. And he had friends in Minnesota that he would go and visit. And he was been there several times, so he was comfortable with the area, so he would go out for walks. Even though he was blind, he kind of knew the way, but it so happened that he found himself lost one day, walking through the woods and not really knowing what to do. Can you imagine being blind and having no idea where you're at? So finally he decided, I heard a car. And so he went to the road, and he found a road, and he just waited there. And somebody did drive by, they stopped, and sure enough, they actually even knew him and his friends. So he took him back home. A very simple story, but a story that nonetheless is a good example of what prayer is like. So many times what we need to do is put ourselves by the road to be found by God. It's not so much in our activity in doing this or that, but it's rather being still and letting God fight for us, so to speak. So I encourage you more and more to be still. Nonetheless, let us review some of the practices that help us, in a sense, to be still. One of them, the main one really that we're working with in this retreat, is called Lectio Divina, a divine or a holy reading. There's a sheet that I gave you, I included on one of the previous emails, or you might have seen a green sheet on a script as to how to pray, whether it's in a family, in a group, or just by yourself. But even without that, it's fairly straightforward. We first of all just put ourselves in a place of rest, a place of allowing the Lord to look upon us, and entering in a calmness into prayer. Then we simply read the scripture passages, usually probably 3 times. If it's long, maybe less. If it's short, maybe a couple more times. Giving perhaps a little pause in between each reading, just letting it soak in. This allows certain words to catch us, to catch our attention, that they might be places of dialogue with the Lord about. Or gives us context for our imagination to dive into the prayer. Then as we continue to just be with the Lord in this, after we're done reading those passages, we just really stay with the Lord, speaking about what came up as the passage was read, what's going on, what's happening, even employing that habit of ARRR, where we relate different experiences, different things that catch our attention or ways that we feel, and relate them to God and see what He's thinking about them. This is the bulk of the prayer. Maybe a good 20 minutes or so if you're praying for a half hour, as I recommend. Then, in the last 5 minutes or so of this prayer, one does what's called a colloquy, a speaking to the Father, to Jesus, to Mary. I hope you're remembering that. Very important. It's oftentimes in this very place of prayer that we hear the Lord speak to us. And so we give Him that opportunity, like, Father, do you have anything you want to say to me? And we just leave a space of openness there for a minute or so. Maybe there's things we want to say, and we can make our words heard to Him. So we do the same for the Father, for Jesus and Mary. And then, if we're doing it in a group, we might share our experiences with one another. We'd also take these to a journal to write them down. This form of praying is really at the heart and soul of the retreat, to be doing this every day. In fact, I say to do this really every day of our life. This is what we're created for, to be in union with God. It is this consistency in prayer that brings about such great healing into our lives. So I encourage you to be attentive to that. How do we know that the Lord speaks to us? Let me review that a little bit as well. Some days back I mentioned these different aspects of hearing God. Whether that be in our mind, like certain words that come, certain thoughts that come that don't seem to be from us, or ways in which our emotions stir and change that can't really be explained by what's going on, other than the fact that God enters in and changes them. There's our imagination that the Lord can work with, a certain image that He'll give us, a certain sense, or sometimes an imagination in the more sense of imagining yourself in a scene and the Lord shaping and moving that. But all these ways that He works with this faculty of imagination within us. And our desires. The fact that the Lord will stir up within us certain desires to be holy, to want to pray more, to draw in relationship with another, to want to offer forgiveness or to receive forgiveness. These can be different desires that the Lord can stir up within us that are very important for our prayer. So the idea then is to, as we do Lectio, to be paying attention to any ways in which God enters in. God shows up. If we take ourselves back to the example of the road, it's any time where a car comes by and stops and we find our salvation, our rescue. Everything else we can kind of ignore as just not being that important. All of the self-talk, all of our own thoughts, or all of our own thinking, or our analyzing of the text. We may think it has value, but it's better to think of the greatest of value. What I'm really searching for is the Lord and what He desires. What does He value? What does He think? And so it is those moments that we want to look out for and wait for. As I heard it said by one author, God is not chatty. So oftentimes it is just certain moments that we hear Him in prayer. And it is in this hearing that we respond and we stay present to that. Within the prayer itself. Even as it affects our whole demeanor towards the Lord in our prayer throughout our day. And so the next day we might do what's called a repetition. Remembering this concept of returning to the Lord in a place where we encountered Him and seeing if He has more to say. This is called repetition and is essential to our praying, and actually makes praying a whole lot more meaningful and allows a deeper healing and encounter with the Lord. It's really these kind of simple basic things such as Lectio Divina, this relational prayer of ARR, this habit within the prayer. It's this paying attention to God and responding via repetitions. It really lays the whole context for this time of retreat. So I want to give you some words of encouragement. Maybe you've been listening and feeling like I'm not really applying this much because I'm just so busy with this or that, or other things are going on. It's okay. But at the same time, I encourage you, particularly as we enter into Holy Week, to give way. The Lord is, in a sense, at least allowed for what seemingly is the stopping of the whole world. How about that stopping of the world becomes a time where we fix our gaze upon the Lord and be drawn into seeing Him face to face. May the Lord truly bless your prayer and allow yourself to enter deeper into deeper union with Him. Many blessings.